Alrighty, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
And what a glorious morning it is turning out to be. I think we better enjoy it while we can. Alrighty, so we are in first chapter of John, actually the end of John 1 this week. God sees Nathanael, and we're somewhere around 26 to 30 AD, around the east of Jordan. And things are starting to get a little bit active for Jesus. His time is starting to arrive. So as he often did, we see Jesus this week going to unexpected places and talking to unexpected people. He was putting together his group of disciples, and as he often did, he was not recruiting from where we would expect him to or from with whom we would expect him to. He wasn't going to the what would be commonly thought of as the A team. Kind of akin to skipping the Ivy League colleges and recruiting instead from inner city high school dropouts. But these were the people he wanted, and he had a plan for them. So he went to Galilee, and he was picking largely from the uneducated. I think Matthew may have been one of the main exceptions, because Matthew was very...
So was Nathaniel, I think.
No,
He at least had a trade,
yeah,
a skilled trade.
no, I don't know.
Yeah, it's
Just
about there.
thinking, huh?
Laid blocks. Stonemason.
Yeah. Well, that was, I looked that up a little bit this morning on the Google to see, because we watched The Chosen Season 2, Episode 2, which the beginning and the ending of that episode really goes along with this week's lesson. And the Chosen series has Nathaniel as an architect, as a Jew who managed to get hired by the Romans, which was pretty unusual. And then he wanted to build churches to glorify God and vaulted ceilings to bring people closer to God. And there was some kind of a catastrophe right at the end of, he was having an argument with the foreman about the cement that they were using was not up to snuff. And right then stuff collapsed and he got fired, and then kind of went into where our lesson picks up. So I couldn't find anything online in the quick search I did that said that's Nathaniel was an architect or whatever he was. So I think that may have been The Chosen just taking some creative license. Okay, so back to the lesson this week. This is going to provide us some pretty powerful insight into who Jesus claims to be and how we should respond, and underlining that sharing the good news is a critical part of following Jesus. All right, so we start out again pretty far into first chapter of John. John calls Philip. The day following, Jesus would go forth into Galilee, and findeth Philip, and saith unto him, Follow me. Feeling particularly wordy, apparently. Now Philip was of Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. So there were certainly many other more likely educated, sophisticated, finer places and people Jesus could have sought to recruit as his disciples. That's what we would expect, but of course that's not what he did. But then again, Jesus himself was born in Bethlehem, but raised in Nazareth, and Nazareth wasn't exactly esteemed or considered developed itself. So maybe he was a little predisposed to looking at the outsiders or the underdogs.
Yeah, Nazareth was always considered like the truck stop.
Mm-hmm.
So typically when you think of a truck stop of, the prostitutes, and because this is where everyone traveled through and looking for a night, night stay or whatever, it was kind of the midway point of everything.
Yeah. So at this point, Jesus was likely near Bethsaida along the Sea of Galilee. And Philip, that he went to recruit, may have been a fisherman just like Andrew and Peter. We don't know. Now, Jesus' ask to Philip was direct, it was simple, and it was straightforward. It was also unencumbered by details, conditions, or explanation. He just said, "Follow me." So his call to Philip was a total unconditional call. He didn't elaborate what would happen to Philip if he answered that call or what it would cost Philip. But Philip did choose to listen to Jesus and obeyed him. And we today are similarly called to follow Jesus unconditionally, no matter what it may cost us. All right, so Jesus has recruited Philip. And Philip was energized and he was motivated after meeting Jesus. So in verse 45, Philip findeth Nathanael and saith unto him, We have found him, of whom Moses and the law and the prophets did write, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. So Philip's excitingly finding his friend Nathanael, and sharing the breathtaking breaking news that they had found the one that the Jews had been waiting on and looking for. Just not the guy they thought they would find. As Cliff often reminds us, they expected their Messiah to be a political or a military powerhouse. He was going to kick butt and take names and get the Romans' heel off of their neck. They were looking for vindication and probably a little bit of revenge at that point.
And that's what's going to make the Antichrist very powerful, because, yeah, he's going to give all the lands back to Israel, and they're going to see him as a Messiah.
Philip is telling his buddy Nathanael, this is the one that Moses and the prophets had written about in the Old Testament. Now, just for clarification, apparently in the other gospel books, Nathanael is called Bartholomew, just for clarity. So when the Jews often spoke of the law, the writings, and the prophets, which encompassed the entire Old Testament, sometimes they would use that threefold description, and then sometimes they would switch over and use a twofold distinction, just saying the law and the prophets. Now, which one was correct, which one was wrong? Neither, because Jesus often used the twofold description when he talked about the Old Testament, but at other times he used that threefold description. So either of these descriptors are correct or acceptable, and they're just used as shorthand with neither of the descriptor being wrong. So you can have the law and the prophets, you can have the law and the writings and the prophets. It means the same thing. But more importantly, Philip's claim here to Nathanael was huge, because he argued that Jesus is the one who all the scripture had been anticipating. And Jesus, this guy that he found, that had found him, was the culmination of thousands of years of expectation. And then Nathanael said unto him, Can there any good thing come out of Nazareth? Philip saith unto him, Bless you.
Thank you.
Come and see. Kind of simple, like follow me. Nathanael wasn't as automatically on board like Philip had been. Nathanael was skeptical, and he assumed the long-awaited Messiah would not come from Nazareth. Nazareth was small, it was in the middle of nowhere, it wasn't near a major city or body of water. And it's unclear at that point whether Nathanael's skepticism was because he had a prejudice against Nazareth, as in Nazareth was not worthy of producing a Messiah, which was probably more likely, or if he was thinking, well, the prophecies say the Messiah is supposed to come from Bethlehem. Well, Philip might not have even been aware that Jesus was born in Bethlehem per messianic prophecy. But even if Philip knew that, he didn't try to explain to his buddy Nathanael that Jesus fulfilled the Old Testament prophecies. He didn't try to debate with Nathanael the likelihood that the Messiah was going to emerge from Nazareth. He just encouraged Nathanael to come and see for himself. So, fortunately, that's what Nathanael did. His friend asked him to come and see, so he did. Philip realized he didn't need to try to answer every objection a skeptic might raise about who Jesus is and what he could do. So when we meet people, you and I encourage them to try to follow Jesus, we should try to address any objections or questions or gotcha statements that they have. We should try to address those. But then sometimes we should just try to get them to come and listen to Jesus, because sometimes our job is to make the introduction and let Jesus take it from there. We should try if we can, but sometimes our job is just to make the introduction. And sometimes, if we're lucky, Jesus has already been busy laying the groundwork with somebody for us to make them more receptive to us than they might have been before. All right. So Jesus saw Nathanael coming to him, and saith of him, Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no guile. So when Nathanael approached Jesus, Jesus announced that Nathanael had no deceit in his character. We can infer that Nathanael, albeit as imperfect as the rest of us, was honest and not giving to flattering deception, or blowing smoke, as some of us might say, based upon his earlier response to his friend Philip, and also that Nathanael was proud of his Israelite heritage and his honest life. Now, to have this knowledge about Nathanael's character suggests that Jesus knew him despite Nathanael had never met Jesus. So Jesus claims to have supernatural knowledge of Nathanael, even maybe hinting that he was also aware of Nathanael and Philip's conversation shortly before, where Nathanael was very skeptical. Now, this Jesus' statement that behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no guile, that made Nathanael honestly curious, even if he wasn't really sure about these sketchy Nazarenes. Nathanael could have doubted that Jesus knew him, but more likely, he accepted that Jesus in fact did know him, but just didn't know how. Nathanael saith unto him, Whence knowest thou me? Jesus answered and said unto him, Before that Philip called thee, when thou wast under the fig tree, I saw thee. So here Nathanael's asking Jesus, how do you know me? And Jesus spoke of more supernatural knowledge, which even further confirmed Jesus' divine nature to Nathanael. Jesus knows what we care about, where we're at, what we're doing. Hopefully that's a good thing and it's a comforting thing, because if it's not, you got a problem. There are a couple of things of note here. The first time Jesus saw Nathanael was before Philip even talked to him about this. So that tells us that Jesus was already involved in the details of Nathanael's life before Philip approached Nathanael. And the place that Jesus saw Nathanael was a specific time and a location. But Jesus not only knew Nathanael existed in general, but he also knew who he was as an individual. Not only Nathanael's outward actions, but also his inner thoughts. And there's, as you might imagine, some different theories about the phrase under the fig tree. But regardless of which interpretation we pick, the fig tree detail does still reveal that Jesus is no ordinary man, because he exhibits supernatural knowledge no matter what. So one interpretation is the expression under the fig tree refers to meditating on God's word, because not at this time really, but later on, Jews would use sitting underneath a fig tree to describe engaging in discussions about the books of Mosaic law. If this is what Jesus meant, Jesus was saying that he knew what Nathanael was thinking while he was praying to God. And that could be why Nathanael immediately concluded that Jesus is the Son of God, even without really understanding all that meant at that point. Another interpretation is there are Old Testament passages promising future hope that include fig trees. So it could mean that Jesus was leading his followers to these messianic prophecies that hope was coming to fruition. Because remember, the Jewish Jewish faith had been waiting for the Messiah for a really long time. Or, of course, there's the literal meaning, that Nathanael was physically under a fig tree when Philip met him, or right before Philip met him. But since Jesus was obviously not physically present with Nathanael at that point, we still get the supernatural knowledge that convinced Nathanael that Jesus was the real deal. Now, again, like he was with Nathanael, Jesus is always with us, watching us at all times, supporting us. He's ready to provide for every need and available for us to call on him. He knows everything, both internal and external, about us. And he also has a plan for all of us as his disciples, because our Great Commission is to spread the good news and to make more disciples, so the spread is exponential. Jesus' constant presence should not only comfort us, but it should also help make us competent disciples in our job to spread his word. Okay, so back to skeptical Nathanael. Nathanael answered and saith unto him, Rabbi, thou art the Son of God, thou art the King of Israel. Jesus answered and said unto him, Because I said unto thee, I saw thee under the fig tree, believest thou? Thou shalt see greater things than these. So, Nathanael has realized suddenly and immediately that beyond all earthly logic, Jesus did in fact know him, and that Jesus was from God. If Nathanael was prejudiced against the Nazarene, he immediately abandoned that, as he recognized the Messiah evidently could hail from Nazareth after all. And at the end of the day, it was Jesus' omniscience. That's what did it for Nathanael. That's what convinced him. And there are a couple of contrasts to note here. First, there's the difference in Nathanael before and after he met Jesus. And secondly, there's the difference in descriptions of Jesus. Initially it was, well, he's the son of Joseph when Philip introduces him. And then Nathanael blurts out, he's the Son of God. And he's not wrong, but that's a pretty big, pretty drastic, immediate switch to make. Nathanael's description of Jesus' identity as the Son of God is going to be repeated a lot of times, and ultimately that's going to be the charge against him by the Romans. And here in verse 49, when he addresses Jesus as rabbi, he's addressing him as a teacher, but he also recognized Jesus as much more than just a good teacher. In verse 50, we see clearly on Jesus' part, he was a little bit amused at how quickly and completely Nathanael changed his tune and scrapped his skepticism. And Jesus is promising Nathanael, well, you ain't seen nothing yet. It's going to get a lot better. So buckle up and hang on. All right, last verse, 51. And he saith unto him, Verily, verily, the running marquee lights, because it's been a while since we talked about this, but when Jesus says verily, verily, that means, hey, pay attention. This is really important. Verily, verily, I say unto you, hereafter ye shall see heaven open, and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. I'll get to the Son of Man in a few minutes, but Jesus is promising to Nathaniel about seeing heaven open and angels going up and down is a pretty clear reference to Jacob's ladder from Genesis 28. Jesus was claiming to be the fulfillment of the promise of Genesis 28 when he's saying this to Nathaniel. He was claiming to be the access point between heaven and earth. And that foreshadows how Jesus would bless the world, and it anticipated Jesus' later claim that no man cometh unto the Father but by me. There's more interesting contrasts here because you've got honest, blunt, no guile Nathaniel, but then Jacob's ladder, that's brother cheating Jacob. Jacob's another example of God calling somebody to work his plan despite that person's sketchy background and character, because Jacob surely was not your A-team material to look at him, because Jacob had manipulated his brother and swindled his twin's birthright away from the twin, and then Jacob deceived their father and got the blessing that his father had meant to give the older brother. Jacob's a really swell guy. We'd all want to hang with him. Not. So at that point, Jacob's mother realized that Jacob's twin might just kill him if Jacob didn't leave. And when your own mom says, you gotta leave because you have done so much wrong, your brother's gonna kill you, probably literally, you know you have messed up. Big time. So off Jacob fled to what was going to be the interior of the promised land, but he got tired and he stopped for the night to rest. And Jacob had a pretty remarkable dream that night. He saw God at the top of a stairway with angels ascending and descending. And God declared to Jacob in this dream that he would be with Jacob, provide for his needs, and take Jacob back to the home that he just fled. Jacob responded, knowing a good deal when he saw one, promised to follow God if God made good on those promises, which actually were the same promises that God had made to Abraham and Isaac. So he's just extending them to Jacob. So God would reach for Jacob from heaven to earth to reverse sin's curse, because he knew Jacob had sinned a lot, but he was going to reach from heaven to earth to reverse sin's curse with the blessing of salvation. Now, just as in Genesis with the Jacob's ladder dream, here in verse 51 of first chapter of John, the focus here is on Jesus, the Son of Man, not the angels ascending and descending. Now, in Jacob's vision, the ladder connected heaven and earth for the angels to travel between the two. Jesus here tells Nathaniel that the angels will be ascending and descending on Jesus. So here, Jesus is the ladder in Jacob's vision. Jesus is the connection between heaven and earth. And being fully human and fully divine, which is called the hypostatic union, Jesus has a unique relationship to God's realm in heaven and our human realm here on earth. Jesus would open a way for sinful humans to reconcile their relationship with God. Because Jesus died for our sin, which separated us from God, Jesus bridged the gap between us and God. Now, did Nathaniel likely understand and appreciate all this right at this point? Probably not, and he definitely wouldn't have understood how all that was going to pan out and how it would actually come to happen. But, and then at the end of verse 51, he said that Jesus is referring to himself as the Son of Man. And it was Jesus who most often referred to himself as Son of Man in the Gospels. But somebody else only actually referred to Jesus as the Son of Man only once in Acts, and that was in Acts 7. Now, let's not say, the Son of Man title was used a lot in the Old Testament. You see it in Ezekiel. Where Ezekiel's humility was contrasted with God's glory. You also see the Son of Man title used a lot in Daniel, where the Son of Man is glorious and rules forever over all nations. Jesus fulfills both meanings of the Son of Man because he was fully human and he shared in our weaknesses like in Ezekiel, but he's also the glorious one who comes on clouds and rules nations like in Daniel. While Jesus didn't deny when he was called the Son of God or the King of Israel, he really didn't spotlight it as it wasn't his time yet to call undue attention to himself. Because if he had kind of prematurely called that attention to himself and put a spotlight on himself as the Son of God or the King of Israel, he probably would have faced crucifixion too early before his mission was sufficiently finished. Son of Man was kind of a compromise because that was a title that Jesus could claim without being charged with blasphemy while still kind of giving a hint at his true identity. Excuse me. Okay, found a different squirrel for this week. Not maybe quite as amusing as the squirrel eating the red hot chips that Scott found. But at any rate, so God doesn't hide his identity and he reveals himself in various ways. He does call us to follow him unconditionally, and the accompanying cost that may come with that is undefined. But it's a package deal. The entire Old Testament actually points to Jesus. So you can read it and look for those ways that the Old Testament points to Jesus, and that's something that we can talk to folks about when we invite them to come to Jesus. And Jesus knows everything about us. The good, the bad, the ugly, the things we wish he would know, the things we hope he doesn't figure out, but he knows anyway. And we can come to him even when we're doubtful or even when we're feeling skeptical and weak in our faith. He's still there. And when we truly encounter Jesus, we will confess that he is far more than just a mere man. And as always, we need to expect God to work in mighty but unexpected ways in our lives. Because if nothing else, sometimes God just likes to keep it interesting. I think sometimes make sure if we're paying attention. Or to scream at us, wake up. All right, that's all I have. Did anybody have anything else to add today? Okay, thank you.